Hello, welcome to today's InstaLive, and today we're going to talk about managing worry and anxiety when you are trying to conceive. And why is it important to learn how to manage worry and anxiety? Well, it's important not only because you want to feel okay and well, because treatment lasts several months or even years to some people. So we want to find a way where you are well, where you are emotionally stable to cope with whatever comes, and you are feeling empowered, and you want to be able not only to go ahead with treatment, but also to enjoy other areas of your life. However, I feel that there is a lot of uncertainty going on at the moment, not only because of coronavirus, that brings with it not only uncertainty regarding our health and our well-being, our ability to go ahead with fertility treatment or not, but also brings uncertainty when it comes to jobs, for example, and that can trigger other uncertainties in terms of relationships. So there is so much uncertainty in the air that I felt that we needed to talk about worry and anxiety. So I'm going to bring Beatrice into the talk with us. Let me see if I can find her. Beatrice is our director of Healthy Minds, and she's my sister. She's a psychologist, and I'm very, very delighted that she helps me in this journey. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea. I am a registered nurse, and I've had my own issues with fertility. I was diagnosed with infertility at a very young age, when I was 17, and it was very difficult to cope with not being able to get pregnant, even before I had started to get pregnant. So all of that triggered a lot of worry and anxiety at the time, and I had to learn to live with it, and I developed some very good strategies along the way. So about 5 years ago, I decided to combine my strategies that I had developed to cope with my infertility with the strategies that I had as a nurse to combine in a unique program that has been helping so many people. So I have here Beatrice that is joining us finally. Hi, Bea.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here today. I was just doing a short introduction saying who I was, where I came from, and I've just told everyone you're my sister, but you're also a graduate in psychology, and you are a very valid member of our team because we bring together the physical aspects with the emotional aspects as well of treatment, which is really important. And today we're talking about anxiety and worry. And
yes,
the reason why I wanted to talk about it was because there is so much uncertainty in the air at the moment. We've already had a lot of uncertainty earlier in the year because of coronavirus and clinics having to close, and that triggered a lot of anxiety and worry in a group of patients who were already very anxious and already had a lot of uncertainty. But things can get worse again. It looks like numbers are worsening.
The second wave is coming again.
Yes, so I wanted to tackle it really and maybe leave here understand where worry and anxiety come from.
Yes.
And maybe understand, are there any physical symptoms? What happens in our brain when we feel anxious? And is there a way that we can maybe stop it?
Of course.
Or manage it? But that's too much. From the beginning. Tell me a bit about anxiety and worry.
Okay, so I think
what is anxiety and worry?
So I think it has a lot to do with the same differences there are between stress and clinical stress. So for example, everyone feels anxious at times, but it's not clinically worrying, okay? And there are physical symptoms that can differentiate these two things. So anxiety is when you feel maybe helpless, but most of all worried without bounds regarding something. And this anxiety can be very disempowering for you. So, for example, you can have a problem in your life, so I want to get pregnant, but you don't have the means to do so because of the coronaviruses. You can go to a hospital, you can't have access to treatment, and this can create this feeling of helplessness. I can't get what I need to do. And so this thought can be very vicious, and you have this intrusive sensation that you're failing and that nothing is ever going to get better because of it. And so I think that anxiety is most of all something psychological that can take over you, and the fact that we can take out of it some mysticism is important. So it isn't something that lasts forever, and it isn't something that can't be managed.
So what I'm hearing you say is that worry and anxiety is something that comes to our minds when we're thinking about the future.
Exactly.
And about not having a need or a want met.
Yeah.
I also heard you say that it's almost like a chain of thoughts or events that gets increasingly worse. So it starts with coronavirus is getting worse, and then it can go to the next chain. Clinics are going to close. Next chain, I'm not going to get pregnant this year. Next chain, I'm never going to be a mom. My husband is going to leave me, and I'm going to die alone by myself. So it's almost like a chain, isn't it?
Yeah, and also the symptoms get increasingly worse. So, for example, it can start with a small thought, but when you realize you're having full-on panic attacks, and this is something that we need to prevent because physical symptoms can show that something isn't just psychological anymore, and it can take
Okay.
a form that affects not only your physical life but your social life. And so it sometimes can be retroactive, in which your anxiety feeds itself into never stopping.
That's a good point because being worried is mostly in our mind, right? But
Yeah.
if we're anxious or if we have a panic attack, we'll have the physical symptoms as well, like the heart beating really fast, sweating, breathing difficulties. So
Yeah.
then we start having more of the physical and the thought as well.
Yeah, and I think that even beyond that, for example, so I have all these physical symptoms, but perhaps next time I even have the chance to do the treatment I wanted to, I'm not going to, because then we associate to fear all the anxiety that we have. So, for example, I want to do this, but now I can't. This is going to trigger something in me. And this is another very important part of anxiety. So you have triggers that can awaken your anxiety. And we can speak about these in a little while when we speak about exercises to help us prevent
Yeah.
anxiety. Yeah.
So would you say that triggers would be, I don't know, things that are new or
Well, yeah.
things that we don't know how it's going to end
Yeah,
tends to be things that maybe make us a bit worried or maybe a bit more anxious.
definitely. So a simple example, if we could go out right now with no mask,
Yeah.
would we? Probably not. Even if everyone said it was completely safe, we would still have fear and anxiety to do so because we've already associated it with the stimuli of not wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
So the same can happen to people who are trying to conceive. So they can link something to an action or a thought, and that becomes a trigger. And it isn't the same for everyone. So for me, something that is very simple can be very frightening to you.
Yeah, so it's all about the meaning that we are giving to the experience itself, isn't it? And the thoughts that come in that chain. Because if I perceive the situation as, well, I have to have my treatment delayed, but I'm going to have it in a few months, as
Yeah.
opposed to starting to think the worst is going to happen, it might have a different feeling, a different level of anxiety as well.
Definitely. I think that beyond the trigger, which is when it starts, it's very important to know the follow-up. So how are we feeding this trigger along the way? So I can feel the trigger and then I can calm myself down. But what happens with anxiety is that we keep feeding this, and that's why it doesn't stop.
Sometimes it's really hard to stop the thought,
It
isn't it?
is.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think sometimes it's harder to stop the thought when we get the understanding that there isn't a solution to the problem. Because if we feel there might be a solution, the anxiety level reduces a bit.
Exactly. And it can also prevent you from looking forward to a solution. So you get stuck in that point. And sometimes people think, oh, it's easier to stop anxiety when you think of previous experiences. And that's not always true. So if you have a trigger and you have experiences saying that it is not a trigger, it's not going to trigger you into anything, it doesn't prevent you from actually believing in it, because that's what we're talking about. It's belief. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's very difficult to be rational about what actually can harm us and what actually can prevent us from doing things. So I think, and we're always coming back to the system of beliefs, because what we believe in has a tremendous amount of power.
Yeah, and if we believe it's going to be harmful, if I believe that I'm never going to be a mom because of what's happening right now, and it triggers all those physical and emotional symptoms, it almost reminds me of the fight or flight modes that our body is in. And just like when we are in that fight or flight mode, we're not able, as our body is not able to do normal things. It's just ready to fight the threat or to run away from it. And our brain also doesn't have that rational part of coming up with solutions that you were thinking. It's just in the fight or flight mode. So the emotional response more than the rational one.
Definitely. I think there are even documented cases of people who were trying to conceive and were taking on lots of treatments, and it never worked because these treatments put an immense amount of stress on people, and they become really anxious with knowing if it's working, if it's not, and sometimes they have to wait. So I know examples of people who had to stop treatment because it was very expensive. And once they relaxed and they accepted, okay, we're not going to be parents, we have to enjoy life in another way, they got pregnant.
That's horrible. That's what
Yeah,
patients do not want to hear. That they don't want to be told just
yeah.
relax. But
It's awful because it doesn't just happen with relax.
it doesn't. But you raise an important question, which is the emotional distress, which is the number one reason for patients to stop treatment.
And this is where we can help. So it's not stopping treatment, which is increasing your odds of
Yeah.
actually becoming fertile. And we can add the psychological component to help these people along the way so that they can have a smoother and happier process throughout all of this.
Yeah. So
Because this doesn't happen in a majority. So forgetting treatment and just going out and getting pregnant, this isn't the majority. This is a small percentage of people who this actually happens to.
yeah. So for people who are trying to conceive, I think the anxiety comes from not knowing if it's actually going to happen, if they're going to get pregnant.
Yeah.
If it's going to happen this month, in a few months, or maybe in a few years, or maybe never. It comes from the anxiety of not knowing if it's going to have an impact in their relationship, in their work, because a lot of people stop applying for jobs or promotions because of it. So there's so many triggers, and then the medications that you were talking about also have also cause changes in hormonal levels that make us more emotional or anxious or fearful or any other or emotional response that we get.
Yeah. I think it's very, very important to keep a positive mindset, which it isn't easy. It's not going to happen. We've all had moments in our lives in which we feel like no one understands, because what people tell us is just relax, don't worry, don't be sad. If we could, we wouldn't be.
Of
But we
course, no
can't.
one chooses to be stressed or sad or depressed. No one chooses to be that way.
Of course. And that's why I think it's very important to talk about the practical ways in which we can prevent anxiety, or at least minimize it when we have to.
Absolutely. And it comes to mind an exercise that you have created for our enhanced fertility program, which was the anxiety and worry decision tree.
Yes.
Found very useful because we assume all the beliefs that come to our head as real and true, but some of them are not. Do you want to tell me a bit about the worry and anxiety decision tree?
So this is evidence-based. So what does this mean? We take the evidence that we have in our lives and try to apply it in a way that is useful for us to decrease our anxiety. And of course, as I said before, sometimes it isn't enough. And that's why we are working on it, because by making the tree, we can sometimes change the belief that we have. So this is a very initial exercise. It's also great for screening how you are at the moment. So this tree is basically based on this notion that our decisions are consequential. So we're going to start by looking at what am I worrying about?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're going to write it down to be aware of what we are thinking of. And then we think, can I do something about it? And if I can do something about it, then yes, I'll put another arrow down and I'll signalize it as yes. And we're trying to put what we can do, what resources we have, when we're going to do it, and this is making it more specific. But when we say no, this actually has to have some sort of escape route for the people who say that they don't have this. So what we suggest is some management with some strategies of how we can actually help.
Yeah.
And of course, this is different for if your anxiety comes from not having resources or not having time or not having anything that you're able to do. So of course, this is very specific, but for example, if I can't do absolutely anything, then maybe some relaxation exercises are the best because we have no way of getting out of that situation. And so, tell me.
And in that first point where we're trying to understand if there is a solution or not, I think it's useful to say that the worry and the anxiety is usually classified as a real problem worry or a hypothetical worry. And
Yeah.
real problem worry or anxiety is the one that you're saying that has the solution and there is something that we can do about it. And the exercise prompts you to write down the steps.
Yeah.
But the hypothetical worries are the ones that don't have a practical solution to it. And like you said, they need a different management. But just realizing that they are hypothetical, for example, I might be anxious of going to the supermarket and dying of coronavirus. So it's not likely that I'm going to die from going to the supermarket.
Yeah. I think it's when we're talking about, for example, goals, we have SMART goals, right?
Yeah.
I think it's also important to have SMART problems or SMART issues. Because if I say I am worried with the hunger all over the world, I can't solve that. But if I say, oh, I'm worried that my neighbor doesn't have food because he can't go to the supermarket now, then this is a smaller thing that I can help with. And it's a small accomplishment that I can actually work on and maybe solve my bigger anxiety. So I think it's important to have SMART issues and to be understanding of what we can actually solve. I think being specific is very important. If we choose this broad problem, it's too much. We need to start somewhere.
I understand. And by writing it down, it makes it a bit easier because sometimes we are anxious and we don't even know what are we anxious about. What do we believe that is going to happen? What are the consequences that I think are going to happen in my life?
Yeah.
That is giving me this anxiety.
That's actually a very important point because if you feel anxious out of the blue often and it escalates quickly, for example, into a panic attack, then this can mean something clinical. So one thing is not being able to identify what's causing your anxiety, and that's one thing, but having it out of the blue with no trigger, and often it can mean something else. And so it's good to have it looked at.
So we're talking about, because there is no right amount of worry, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's
It's
about what you can manage. So people can manage a lot of worry and people can manage little worry. Depends from person to person.
That's true. So there is little worry, and then there's excessive worry, and then there's somewhere in between. I would like us to maybe come up with some strategies that could help people manage. from the point of where they've done your tree, right? The decision tree, to see if it's hypothetical or real, if there is a plan in place. So that might reduce their levels of stress a bit. But then what can they do as a preventative measure on their day-to-day for things that are going to go on for a while? For example, the coronavirus pandemic that is going to go on for a while, or fertility treatment that is going to go on for a few months or years even.
Yeah, I think prevention can come in many forms, depends on what we're worrying about. But I think it's very important to have free spaces in our time in which we can actually take our mind off of it. So for example, we're worrying that we can't go out of our houses because of the coronaviruses, which is very triggering for some people. It's normal. But we can have smaller ways of dealing with that. So for example, we can have Skype calls with friends and family. We can go to the balcony. We can go to our window. So there are escape routes. And I think that's very important to keep ourselves busy.
Yes.
So it's not forgetting that you're worrying, but it's keeping yourself motivated and feeling like you're contributing to something.
So you're talking about having in your day activities that give you some connection with others, that also bring you pleasure and accomplishment that maybe are not related to the trigger or fertility, coronavirus, or whatever is being the trigger. So keeping busy with being connected and doing pleasurable things. So what things are pleasurable to you? What would you do if you wanted to?
Before I tell you that, you touched a very important point, which is sometimes what triggers us isn't necessarily what we identify as our need. So for example, I'm so upset that my friend didn't text me today. And maybe what makes me upset isn't that this friend didn't text me. Maybe what is triggering my anxiety is that I haven't been with anyone for so long. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the trigger is something small for a completely different reason. Sometimes you need some introspective moments to understand what's actually causing your anxiety. What gives me pleasure? I actually started working again today, which is...
Congratulations. So that must bring you achievement as well, because you're something.
Yeah. It fills my time up, which is amazing. And it's definitely good for my mental health. But I love watching movies. It's something that relaxes me a lot. Being with my boyfriend. So having meaningful moments with people, it's something that I feel like from an existential point of view helps everyone. Even if you're more of a lonely wolf, I think it's good to have connections.
Yeah, I've just been for a 15-minute walk before this InstaLive, and I feel so different because I've been working so many long hours here sitting in my office, and I thought I just need some fresh air, contact with nature, and I'm just in a much better mindset now.
Yeah, for people who work very long hours, what I normally suggest is, even if you just get up for 5 minutes, go outside and just take a deep breath in. If just once, it works wonders. You just have to break the cycle once for like 5 minutes each 2 hours, and it's amazing. It's good for your mental health as well.
And Bea, I have this strategy here, which is a bit odd, but
Tell
I want
me.
to ask you what you think of it. Because when we get worried or anxious with a thought in our mind, thought almost wants us to engage with it straight away. It's like you can't do anything else. You need to give me attention. I'm your worry. I'm your worry. Give me attention. So it wants you to be there immediately. So this strategy that I have is taking back control and saying, okay, I'm going to engage with you, worry, when I want to. So I'm going to engage with you at 5 o'clock today when I have 15 minutes to think about the problem and how terrible it is. But I feel gaining that control can be really, really powerful.
I think so as well. I mean, you don't have to have any mental issues to feel any of this. So for example, when I'm really sad, I normally listen to a very, very sad song and then I stop. I get one sad song and
Yeah.
that's it. And I think it helps. It
Does it?
helps a lot. So people normally say, don't be sad, just listen to something happier. I can't. I need one sad song and then I'll put it aside. So it's very important to acknowledge it. So if you ignore it, it'll just grow bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
I think acknowledging is a good point.
Yeah.
Because it takes me to the next step that I'm thinking, which is I'm feeling anxious, but then I've
Yeah.
realized, okay, I'm anxious. I've acknowledged it, but now I'm blaming myself for feeling anxious. So I'm feeling blame and anxiety at the same time, and it's crap. So
Yeah.
maybe we need to find a more compassionate way after that acknowledgement. What do you think about that?
I mean, I'm going to say this now, but I know that if I was feeling it, probably I wouldn't rationalize it like this. So, for example, I think we have to think that we're human. Okay, it's we can feel great and we can feel like crap, and that's normal. And so it is also part of the experience of being human, having this fluctuation of feelings, and it's okay to feel whatever. It's okay to do it because you can always take back control of what you're feeling. So I think it's okay. But if I were in that position, I would probably need someone else to tell me that I'm not being a burden and that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing wrong. And I think I do that sometimes. So if I'm really, really tired and I'm really, really sad, I feel like I need someone to tell me that
Yeah,
it's okay. And sometimes you need this external voice
yeah.
to
Sometimes we need outside input to bring us back to the reality of it. But
yeah.
I find that if I say, for example, it's okay to be worried, it's
Yeah.
okay to be anxious because it's uncertain what's going to happen in this cycle, or it's uncertain what's going to happen with the coronavirus. It's normal to be anxious and worried. However, I'm doing everything I can
Yeah.
to make sure that this time of, instead of being a waiting time, it's a preparation time of looking after my physical health, my emotional health, and I'm doing the best way I can with the circumstances that I cannot control.
Yeah. So I think, for example, I was so worried that I wasn't going to get to this InstaLive on time because I left work at 6:40 and this started at 7. And I was like, I'm not gonna get there. I was sweating. I was, doing those autistic movements. And we were driving as fast as we could. And I was like, I can't do anything. I'm driving. If anything, I'll start this call in this car. It's the best. It's going to happen.
So
And
you have
so
your anxiety as well.
yeah, I was thinking I'll just talk from the car. Everything is okay.
And and what's the worst that could happen? Start a few minutes later?
Yeah, sometimes you have to think about the reality of the consequences, and it's normally not as bad as you think they are.
Yeah, that's true. Our brain usually take us
It's
way
been
to
studied.
worse places.
Yeah, it's actually been studied that when we think about the consequences, we normally exaggerate a ton. So it's actually a very good example that when people don't watch horror movies till the end, they always imagine an ending that's worse than the actual movie.
Really?
Yeah, so people have this tendency of making everything worse, which is great. You can prepare yourself for the worst, but it's probably not going to be like that.
Yeah, it's great when we can prepare, but when there is no solution, that
It's
is
not.
the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell me, do you find that there is any benefit in doing mindfulness or meditation or grounding techniques that bring the mind back from that future into the present?
I think there are many ways of grounding yourself, sure, but the structure of meditation or mindfulness, especially when it's guided, because sometimes people say, I don't like it, but there are mindfulness programs for everyone and everyone's taste. So when it's a guided process, it's better. I think it's so important to have your body relax and not be always so stressed and trying to take back control of everything. So letting it go, I think, gives you mental health, physical health, a break, and then it's not like you're restarting again. It's sometimes you have a new look on things because you feel better. I think it's very important.
That's a good point, because when we are practicing mindfulness, it's not about feeling happy, it's about feeling whatever you're feeling in the present moment. So it might be that by practicing mindfulness in a moment when you are super anxious, you will notice that, okay, I'm worried, that's the emotion I'm identifying. But by noticing the present, you are also letting go of all the catastrophic thoughts about the future. And that means that your anxiety levels reduce. You're still anxious, but you're not overly anxious because you're grounded.
And I think that it is good to have a healthy amount of anxiety. It keeps you on your feet. It keeps you active. And I think as long as you can work with it hand in hand, then that's fine. That's great. So when you're losing the grip, that's when you actually have to reevaluate what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it would be unrealistic for people to not be worried when things are not going the way they expect. I mean, if I was happy all the time, that's not normal, is it?
That's actually a Grey's Anatomy quote.
Is
Did
it?
you know? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so they say feeling happy all the time isn't mental health.
Yeah.
It's insanity. You can't be happy all the time.
That's insanity. That's a very good remark.
It actually is insanity. So when you're in a manic state and you're feeling like you're Superman in your head, that's not good. That's reckless. So I think that it's fine to feel, and I think that's the most important thing to take from today. It's fine.
Yeah. So people who are maybe feeling a bit anxious, I think they would be able to use our decision tree to maybe identify, is this normal amount of worry that I can manage, or is this excessive worry that I need help with, maybe more interventions?
Yeah.
And then maybe use some of the strategies that we've talked about today to help manage the levels of anxiety or prevent it from happening.
Yeah, we also been working on the CBT formulation of the anxiety cycle and how to break it. So that's another exercise that's also it's also very interesting.
Yeah, so do you want to tell me about that? How to break the cycle? Because I feel that's one of the most challenging things,
It's
isn't it? Is to break
difficult.
that cycle.
The exercise makes you have to center what's your biggest anxiety. And then you have multiple circles of what is feeding it. So you have your trigger, then you have personal causes, you have environmental causes, because sometimes it's not something that you're feeling, but if you have very stressful work, that can cause you a lot of anxiety and it's not dependent on you. And so you have multiple circles. And what they say is that you have to try and look at each circle at a time. So you can't solve everything, but you can take step by step. So with an example, it's easier. But for example, if I say my environment is extremely stressing, and this is one of the hardest things because it's not a personal thing that I can solve.
Yeah.
Sometimes, for example, it's so stressful that my boss is yelling at me all day. So I think that here we can use multiple strategies. So we can have mindfulness, which is very important, practicing on our verbal communication, how to communicate with our boss, having breaks. And so this exercise makes you have to write possibilities of breaking each individual feeding cycle.
Yeah, so we're talking about all these exercises and strategies, and maybe a lot of people who are listening or who are going to listen to this video on IGTV are wondering, where can I access these resources, right? And I wanted to say that all these resources are in the Enhanced Fertility Program, which is a digital program that makes fertility support accessible for everyone. And it's coming in a few weeks. We're launching the app in the first week of November. However, some of you will be able to access the app soon and early. And some of the exercises, you can access it just in a couple of days. So if you want to access these exercises to manage worry and anxiety, the ones that Pia was talking about, the decision tree, how to break the cycle, some of the goal setting exercises, meditation, all you need to do is go to the link in my bio and register to access the app sooner than everyone else. Okay, that's all you need to do, and we are more than happy to have you join this pre-launch of our app called Enhanced Fertility. Pia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As our director of Healthy Minds was amazing. Thank you for explaining anxiety and worry to us and how it's processed in the brain, in the body, and what we can do about it. I know we'll be here again in a few days, so
we will.
Stay tuned and see you in a few days.
Bye, guys.
Bye.